My father stopped calling me daughter and started calling me wife. I was 11. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway. I'm 83 years old now, and for decades I carried that silence like a second skin. But this is the story of how I broke it, of what happens when no one listens, and what's possible when someone finally does. Have you ever lived with a truth too heavy to speak? I'd truly like to know, what would you have done if you were me? The bulb's been replaced 4 times this year. It still hums like a tired breath flickering in rhythm with the breeze. I suppose I could have someone look at the wiring, but I don't. There's a certain comfort in that hum, a memory wrapped in static. Every night, just after the sun slips behind the ridge and the cicadas quiet down, I step out onto the porch with my cup of tea chamomile, 2 sugars, no lemon, and turn the light on. Not because I'm expecting visitors. I haven't had those in years. But because that's what Mama did. She always said a porch light meant hope, that someone was waiting, that the house was still a home, not just a building with locked doors and forgotten rooms. I used to think she meant for Daddy. He worked late back then, came home with his collar loosened and his hands smelling of sawdust and cold air. Mama would keep the light on until she heard his boots on the steps. Then she'd exhale. That long, silent kind of exhale, only women know, the kind that says, "We made it through another day." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. There's a photograph of her in the hallway beside the coat hooks no one uses anymore. She's standing on that very porch, holding a pie in one hand and shielding her eyes from the sun with the other. Her apron was starched, her hair pinned back neat. That day, she laughed with her whole body head thrown back, neck bare, mouth wide open. That kind of laughter's rare, especially in women who live through what she did. I was 10 in that picture, just off to the side, holding the edge of her skirt. I remember the breeze lifted it just enough to make me laugh too. It was the last photo before she left for Louisville. Mama had troubles with her lungs, the doctor said. Needed cleaner air, less coal smoke. Daddy sent her to stay with Aunt Lillian for the winter, said she'd be back before Christmas. I helped pack her case, 2 dresses, a scarf, her little leather Bible. I remember folding her nightgown and thinking how small it looked. I wondered how something that smelled so much like Mama could fit into something so flat. On the morning of her departure, she knelt beside me on the porch. "You be strong for Daddy, all right? Help him keep the house in order." I nodded. Of course I would. I was the only child. I wanted to make her proud. Then she stood, kissed Daddy on the cheek, and walked down the steps with her suitcase in one hand and a folded umbrella in the other. It wasn't raining, but she always said to be prepared. I watched the back of her head until it disappeared behind the hedge. I didn't wave. I think something in me knew. She never came back the same. That fall was quiet. Too quiet. The house creaked in new ways. Daddy moved slower, spoke less, but smiled more. He'd pat my head and say, "My little woman of the house." I liked that. It sounded grown up, important. At first, I felt useful. I learned to fold laundry like Mama did, to sweep the steps, to pour his coffee just right. Every night, I'd turn on the porch light at dusk, just like she used to, and wait by the window. Sometimes, I'd hum her favorite hymn to myself, "Nearer, my God, to Thee." It made the waiting less heavy. Then, one evening, he came home early, brought me a hairbrush with a pearl handle, said it was mine now. I'd never owned something so pretty. I brushed my hair that night 100 strokes like Mama taught me. and left the brush by the window where the porch light pooled. It was the last gift I remember wanting. Now, 70-some years later, I sit in the same rocking chair she once did. My hair's thinner, whiter. My hands tremble a little when I lift the teacup, but my heart still remembers every detail. The smell of pine in the rafters, the way the boards creaked at the third step, the exact sound of the porch light buzzing right before it steadies. I never had a daughter, never married. I suppose that surprises some people, but I made peace with it long ago. Some women are meant to be wives. Some are meant to be watchers, keepers of lights, tellers of truths. I think I'm the last one. The wind picks up now. I clutch the shawl around my shoulders tighter. Across the street, Mrs. Talbot is pulling her recycling bins in. We nod at each other. She doesn't know much about me. No one here really does, but they see the light. They notice it even if they don't understand it. That's enough. Because someone someday will walk by this house heart heavy with something they can't name, and maybe they'll see that light flickering but persistent, and they'll stop. They'll pause, and they'll know someone kept the light on. For them, for the girl I was, for the girl they might be. That year, Mama left in the middle of October. She never came back the same. Back then, October smelled like cinnamon and fresh-cut wood. Daddy had just finished building the woodpile out back, and Mama was preparing jars of pear preserves on the stove. The house felt full of steam, of humming of little things only mothers notice. I remember the soft hush of her skirts as she moved through the kitchen, the way her fingertips pressed the lid of each jar before setting them down just to be sure they were sealed. Her body was smaller than I remembered from the summer, but her voice still filled the walls. We were preparing for winter, like all families did back then. But it wasn't just the season we were getting ready for, it was her leaving. She tried to hide it, to call it just a short rest. But even at 10, I could hear the tremble behind her smile. The doctor had said it was her lungs. Something about coal smoke and mountain damp. He wrote his diagnosis on a yellowed sheet and folded it twice before handing it to Daddy like it was a grocery list. Mama was to go to Louisville for a better climate to stay with Aunt Lillian until the cough settled. Nobody asked me if I was all right with that. I wasn't. I'd never spent a night without her, let alone a season. But Mama made it seem like an adventure. She let me pack her suitcase 2 pressed dresses, her blue cardigan, a half-used jar of face cream, and the tiny gold cross necklace I always begged to touch, but never dared wear. I laid them gently one by one into the brown leather case. When I zipped it shut, I felt like I was closing something sacred. The morning she left, frost had kissed the windows. I could see my breath in the hallway. She wore her Sunday coat, though it wasn't Sunday, and wrapped her favorite green scarf twice around her neck. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes were bright, too bright like glass before it cracks. We stood on the porch, just the 3 of us. The train wasn't due for another hour, but Daddy always said it was better to be early than to be caught unready. I clung to her sleeve. She bent down, cupped my face, and said, "You be strong for Daddy, all right. Help him keep the house in order." I nodded. Of course I would. I was her little soldier, her steady girl. She pressed her lips to my forehead and held them there longer than usual. I still remember the feel of her breath, warm and minty against my skin. Then she stood, kissed Daddy on the cheek, and walked down the steps. The suitcase knocked gently against her knee with each step, and I watched the tilt of her umbrella as it swung at her side. She didn't look back. After she left, the house changed its sound. It didn't creak the same way. The kitchen didn't smell like preserves. The stove burned hotter, but the warmth didn't reach the corners anymore. Daddy tried, in his own way. He'd sit with me at supper and ask how my day had gone. He started saying grace longer than Mama ever did, sometimes repeating words as though he forgot how it went. He told me I was doing a fine job helping and that Mama would be proud. But I missed the way Mama would tap her fingernail against the glass when she was thinking. I missed her soft when she tasted the soup. I missed the way she'd pull me close without needing a reason. And when I missed her most, I'd go to her room and press my face into her pillow, even though it stopped smelling like her after a week. School became quieter, too. I didn't tell anyone Mama had gone. Not even Mary Beth, my closest friend. I didn't want their pity, didn't want the questions. I just smiled, like I thought Mama would want me to. One day, I stayed late to sweep the chalk dust from the floor just to delay going home. When I got back, Daddy was on the porch looking out into the dusk. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded slowly, just thinking. "About what?" He turned toward me, and for the first time, I saw the tired in his eyes. "About how quiet a house gets," he said, "when a woman leaves it." That night, I turned on the porch light myself. I stood on the top step, the switch in my hand. The bulb buzzed, then glowed a soft amber light, not quite enough to chase away the dark, but just enough to say, "We're still here. We're still trying." I left the door open a crack and waited by the window. I waited for the sound of her heels on the gravel path, for the rustle of her coat as she entered, cheeks pink from the cold. I even imagined the way she'd scold me gently. "You'll catch your death standing by that draft." But the only sound that came was the wind rustling the oak leaves and the faint hum of the porch light overhead. Years later, people asked me when things started to go wrong. I never quite knew what to say. It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a slammed door or a broken dish. It was that porch light, that quiet click, that soft, obedient girl standing alone on a porch, waiting for a mother who would return too late. For the first time, I watched her train disappear and felt the house grow larger than I could carry. It began so quietly, I almost didn't notice. And maybe that's how these things always begin. One morning, about a week after Mama left, Daddy came into the kitchen while I was sweeping. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "You're getting good at that. Your Mama would be proud." I smiled, said thank you, and kept sweeping. That night, when he passed me the plate of ham, he said, "Careful with that little missus. We don't want to chip the good china. Little missus. Not pumpkin, not baby girl." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do with the lump in my throat. The next day, he asked me to sit across from him at supper instead of beside him like I usually did. "Looks more proper," he said. I remember my feet barely reached the floor. I remember watching him butter his cornbread and wondering if he noticed how quiet it had gotten between us. I remember how he reached across the table, touched my hand, and said, "You take after your mother more every day. That's a good thing." I wanted it to be a good thing. I wanted her to come back and see how well I was keeping everything tidy. But instead, the house got darker, even with the porch light on. The neighbors didn't visit much. Mrs. Grady from across the street came by once to drop off a jar of beans. She stood at the doorway and handed it to me, eyes darting past my shoulder. "Your daddy home?" she asked. "He's resting," I said. She smiled tight and quick, like she didn't really mean it. "You holler if you need anything, all right?" I nodded. She never came again. At church, folks asked about Mama. Daddy always answered for me. She's resting with kin in Louisville. Doctor's orders. They nodded and said they'd pray for her. When people asked how I was managing, he'd grin and say, "This little lady runs the whole house now. Got herself a real good head on her shoulders. Smart as a whip. Stronger than she looks." They'd chuckle and pat my head. Once Reverend Cole said, "Raising her right, I see. She'll make a fine wife someday." Daddy laughed. "She's already practicing." And that made everyone laugh a little too long. At home, things changed slowly, like frost forming on a window pane. One corner at a time. He started asking me to stay up later to sit and listen to the radio with him. He'd pour himself a glass of bourbon and offer me a sip. I always shook my head. He'd smile and say, "That's all right. A lady ought to keep her wits." He stopped wearing his slippers around the house, walked barefoot instead. His shirt would be half unbuttoned after supper. He stopped knocking before coming into my room. And I stopped thinking it was strange. Because when it happens slow, it doesn't feel wrong at first. It just feels new. One Sunday, I was walking past the kitchen when I heard Daddy on the phone, one of those clunky ones with the long spiral cord. He was laughing with someone. I swear she's running the house better than her mama ever did. "No, I'm serious. Got herself a little apron and everything. My own little wife." I froze. My hand clenched around the Bible I was holding. He said it like a joke, but I didn't laugh. Something twisted inside me. Not anger, not sadness. A kind of sinking. Like when you're swimming and you realize you've drifted too far from shore. That night, I waited until he went to bed. Then I snuck into the living room and stared at my reflection in the window. It was too dark to see clearly, but I knew that face wasn't Mama's. It wasn't a woman's. It was still a girl's. Still mine. Still scared. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered, "You're not a wife. You're not." But the porch light flickered outside like it disagreed. Things became tighter after that. Not in a physical way. Not yet. But in the way he watched me. In the way his eyes lingered when I bent to pick something up. In the way he complimented my dress and said I filled it out nicely. He started calling me darlin', but it didn't sound the way Mama used to say it. It was slower, like sugar melting on the tongue. One evening, I came down wearing one of Mama's old cardigans. It still smelled faintly of rosewater. Daddy was sitting on the porch, sipping his bourbon. He looked up and smiled. "You look just like her in that." I didn't know what to say, so I said, "It's warm." He patted the space beside him. I sat. The porch boards creaked beneath our weight. He didn't speak for a while, just stared out into the dusk. Then softly, he said, "No one understands us like we do. You and me, we've always been close." I nodded because it felt expected. He reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and said, "Your mama wouldn't get it." That night, I locked my door for the first time. The latch was old, barely held, but it was something, a small act of rebellion. I lay in bed, stiff under the covers, eyes open to the ceiling. The porch light was still on, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a comfort. It felt like a warning, like a beacon in the wrong direction. I smiled like he wanted. But that night, I locked my door for the first time. That night, I turned the lock. But it didn't matter. Some doors open with silence. The first time he jiggled the handle, it was barely past midnight. I was awake. I always was those days. The sound was soft, just a gentle rattle of brass against wood, but it echoed louder than any thunder. I held my breath. He didn't knock, didn't call my name, just tried the door, then silence. A few minutes later, I heard him walk away, his footsteps slow, dragging. and then the familiar click of his bedroom door across the hall. I remember exhaling only after I saw the porch light from my window, still glowing, still flickering, still lying. That was the year I turned 11, old enough to be called young lady, but not old enough to be left alone with the weight of a grown man's grief or hunger. At school, I became smaller, not in size, but in presence. I avoided eye contact. I didn't raise my hand. I sat at the edge of the group during lunch and picked at my bread. Mary Beth asked me once why I'd stopped walking home with her. I told her Daddy liked me to come straight home to have supper ready. She said, "That's weird. My daddy doesn't even know where our plates are." I smiled. I always smiled. It was the only thing I still knew how to do. At home, the air was different. It felt heavier, like the wallpaper was listening, like the carpet had secrets caught in its threads. Daddy talked more, but not about anything that mattered. He'd comment on the weather on the preacher's latest sermon, on how grown I looked in braids. But never about Mama. Never about the locked door. He stopped calling me by my name. He called me Hon Darlin', my girl, and just once sweetheart in a way that made my stomach twist. One night, he brought home a new lamp for my room. A pretty one white lace shade gold stem floral base. He set it on my bedside table and said, "A young lady deserves nice things." I thanked him. He smiled, then sat on the edge of my bed without asking. "Do you remember how your mama used to read to you before bed?" I nodded. "Well, he said I could read to you tonight, if you'd like." I looked at the lamp, then at my quilt, then at the space between us, and I said, "I'm too tired, Daddy. Maybe tomorrow." He didn't press, just patted my knee, stood up and said, "All right then, my little woman." That night, I wedged a chair beneath the doorknob. It didn't feel like enough, but it was all I had. And still, at 1:13 a.m., I remember the clock exactly. I heard the handle move. Once, twice. Then a pause. Then his voice. "Don't lock your daddy out. That's not very kind." I didn't answer. Didn't move. I just stared at the lamp glowing softly beside me and counted the cracks on the ceiling. When the footsteps faded, I stayed awake until morning. The next day, I asked my teacher if I could take home an extra library book. She smiled and said yes. I chose Anne of Green Gables. I didn't care for it. But Anne had her own room and a door that no one tried to open at night. That was enough. A week later, the lock stopped working. I noticed it one evening when I went to click it closed and felt nothing. Just the soft turn of a knob that no longer caught. I opened the door, tried it again. Still nothing. The next morning, I asked Daddy if he'd been in my room. He didn't look up from his toast. "Why do you ask?" "The locket's broken." He wiped his mouth with a napkin and said locks are dangerous. What if there's a fire you wouldn't want to trap yourself in? I nodded, because saying anything else felt too loud. That night, I pushed the dresser against the door. It scraped the floor heavy and slow. I told myself the sound would scare him off. But when I woke up, the dresser was 2 inches away from the wall, and the air smelled faintly of bourbon. I stopped counting the nights. Stopped keeping track of what happened when. It all blurred: his breath, the weight on the mattress, the rustle of blankets that didn't belong to me. Sometimes he'd whisper, "You're my good girl, my brave little wife." And I'd drift somewhere else, to the porch, to Mama's garden, to that train pulling away her scarf, whipping in the wind. The worst part wasn't what he did. It was the morning after. The way he'd smile at me over eggs. The way he'd hand me my school bag like nothing happened. The way he'd kiss the top of my head and say, "You're everything to me." And I believed him, because when you're a child, And the one who's supposed to protect you becomes the one you fear. You still look for love in their hands, even when those hands have taken everything. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair. I didn't recognize myself. Not the eyes, not the mouth, not the shoulders that had started to hunch like they were bracing for something always coming. I took the brush and smashed it against the dresser. Once, twice, until it cracked. Then I sat on the floor holding the broken handle and whispered, "I am not your wife. I am not your wife." But the porch light was still on, and no one ever came to turn it off. Some doors once opened never quite close again. They creak forever in the back of your mind. I opened my mouth to speak, but his eyes across the room said everything louder. The morning she came back, the house looked perfect. I'd spent the whole week scrubbing corners Mama used to check with her fingertip behind the stove, under the stairs, around the edge of the sink, where water spots liked to gather. I even ironed the curtains, though I burned my thumb twice and cried once when the fabric folded wrong. Daddy said she won't notice that and smiled, but I noticed, and I needed everything to be right. Because if the house was clean, if my dress was pressed, if my hair was brushed just the way she used to do it, then maybe she'd see. Maybe she'd see what was wrong. Maybe she'd fix it. She arrived just after sunrise. The car pulled up quiet. I ran to the porch before Daddy could stop me. Her silhouette stepped out slowly, smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a gray coat with a scarf knotted too tightly at her neck. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But instead, I walked. One step, then another. "Mama," I whispered, more breath than sound. She opened her arms. I stepped into them. She smelled of old soap and pine, like a room that's been shut too long. She held me, but not tight. Not like before. When I pulled back, I searched her eyes for questions. For the one I needed her to ask, "Is everything all right, baby?" But all she said was, "Ma, you've grown." Inside, Daddy had already set the table. Biscuits, honey, coffee, neat napkins folded to sharp corners. He kissed her cheek, pulled her chair out, and said, "Just like you never left." And she smiled. She sat. She smoothed her skirt. And that was it. I tried 3 times that day to be alone with her. Once while she unpacked, once while she folded towels, once while she brushed her hair in the bathroom. Each time Daddy was there, in the hallway, on the stairs, leaning against the doorframe, like a shadow with breath. At supper, Mama asked why I wasn't sleeping in my own bed. Before I could answer, Daddy said, "She's scared of the dark." He chuckled. "Can't fall asleep without someone nearby." Poor thing's gotten used to my snoring. Mama looked at me. Her eyes were tired. She smiled and said, "Well, you've always been a sensitive child." I didn't know what hurt more, that she believed him, or that she wanted to. That night, Mama slept alone in the bedroom at the end of the hall. Daddy and I did not. When I slipped into his room, I kept my socks on. I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks. I tried to memorize the sound of her breath faint through the wall, steady, oblivious. I wanted to believe she didn't know, that she was fooled like the others. But something inside me, some small breaking thing, wondered if maybe she'd just chosen not to ask. The next morning, Mama made toast. She used too much butter like always and hummed while she worked. Daddy pinched her waist as he passed, and she swatted at him, laughing. I sat at the table, trying not to shake. Mama turned to me and said, "I think things are going to be just fine now." I wanted to ask, "Do you know where I sleep? Do you hear the door creak at night? Do you know your little girl is gone?" But Daddy's eyes were on me. soft, warning, certain. So I took a bite of toast, swallowed hard, and said, "Yes, ma'am." Later that week, Mama gave me a ribbon. "I found it in my old sewing box," she said. "I used to tie your hair with this when you were a baby." It was pale yellow, frayed at the edges. I thanked her, then wrapped it around my wrist like a bracelet. That night, when Daddy reached for me in the dark, I pressed my fingers to that ribbon and pretended it was her hand, pulling me back to the girl I used to be. I don't know if Mama ever looked for signs. The bruises, the quiet, the locked bathroom door, the way I flinched when she hugged me. Maybe she saw. Maybe she didn't want to. Or maybe she saw it all and decided silence was the only way to survive. I stopped trying to tell her. By the third week, I stopped waiting for her to ask. Stopped hoping she'd open the wrong drawer. Stopped leaving out little clues like blood on my undershirt or a pillow placed just wrong. The porch light stayed on every night, but it wasn't for her anymore. It was for me. A dim reminder that I was still here, still breathing, even if no one noticed. One afternoon, Mama took me shopping in town. Just the two of us. It was meant to be special. She held my hand on the walk to the dress shop and said, "Your father's been such a blessing these past few months. I don't know what we would have done without him." I smiled, because I didn't know how to scream. That night, I opened my mouth to speak. We were doing dishes. She handed me a wet plate. I held it too long. She looked at me. I started to say Mama, but then I saw him in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes calm, watching. And that was louder than any voice I could have used. So I dried the plate, put it away, and said, "Can I go to bed early?" Mama nodded. "You've always been a good girl." That night, Mama slept alone. I didn't. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember because Mama always did laundry on Wednesdays, and that day the backyard smelled like soap and wet cotton. Sheets flapped on the line. The wind was just strong enough to lift them like ghosts snapping soft against the wooden pins. I was 13, not a girl anymore, not yet a woman, just a body full of secrets no one wanted. That morning, I woke up sore. Inside, between my legs. There was blood on the sheet, more than usual, not like a period, not the monthly kind Mama once whispered about behind the bathroom door. This was heavier, thicker, wrong. My thighs ached. There were bruises, small, purplish ones like fingerprints blooming under my skin. And Daddy, he had already left for work. I didn't cry, not then. I folded the sheets like Mama taught me. Pressed the corners. Washed them in the tub so she wouldn't see. Hung them next to hers like nothing was different. The blood dried fast in the breeze. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, knees together, hands folded tight in my lap. Mama was humming as she shelled peas. The rhythm of it made my heart ache. I looked at her fingers, quick, certain, gentle. The same fingers that once wiped tears from my cheeks, buttoned my dresses, braided my hair. I thought she'll know. She'll see. So I opened my mouth and said, "Mama, I think something's wrong." She looked up. Her hands paused. The humming stopped. "What is it, baby?" I hesitated. Then pulled up my sleeve, showed her the bruise on my arm. Small, round, quietly loud. Her mouth tightened, just a bit. She set the bowl down. "Did you fall?" I shook my head. She stood, came over, knelt beside me. Her eyes searched mine. They were tired, older than I remembered. I whispered, "It's not just my arm." I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. Later, I would try to remember the exact words she said. But all I remember is this. She closed her eyes, exhaled, then opened them again and said, "Don't ever say that again." The silence after was thicker than the blood. That night, Daddy came home late. Mama had set the table. 3 plates, roast chicken, 2 candles. She was wearing lipstick. She smiled when he kissed her cheek. I ate without tasting. After supper, she poured him bourbon, then washed the dishes, then sat beside him on the couch while he read the newspaper. I stood in the hallway, watching, and that's when it hit me. She knew. She had known. Maybe not from the start, maybe not the first time, but now she knew and chose not to move. The next day at school, I fainted. The nurse called Mama. I lay on the cot, shivering, listening to the tick of the clock, waiting. When she arrived, her face was tight. She signed the form, helped me into her coat, and whispered, "We'll say it was the flu." I wanted to scream, wanted to grab the pen and write the truth on every wall in that office. But instead, I nodded, because the truth only matters when someone is willing to hear it, to carry it, to bleed with you. Mama wasn't. That night, the bleeding got worse. I curled up in bed, knees pulled to my chest, the sheets already stained again. I remember thinking, if I die here, will she change the story? Will she tell the real version? Or would she say I was fragile, sickly, too soft for this world? But I didn't die. I woke up to his hand on my hair, his breath in the dark. "You scared us yesterday," he said. I didn't answer. He whispered, "You're my strong girl, my good girl." And I bled. 2 days later, a church lady brought over a pie. Mama smiled at the door, thanked her, said I was just under the weather. The woman said, "I'll pray for her." Mama nodded, and that was that. No one asked. No one looked. No one said my name with the kind of concern that reaches past the surface. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had run. At 13, barefoot, down the road, to Mrs. Grady's, or the preacher's, or the school. Would they have opened the door? Would they have believed me? Or would they have called Mama and sent me back? Years later, I tried to write it down, every detail. I tore the pages out, burned them, because no one flinched when I said it out loud. And that silence, it bruises deeper than anything he ever did. When the body screams and the world stays quiet, that's when a child learns to disappear. I didn't run away. I just disappeared one habit at a time until nothing of me was left. There was no single moment when I stopped being a child. No slammed door. No last straw. Just a slow unraveling thread by thread until the girl I was became someone I didn't recognize. It started with the mirror. At first, I avoided it. Then I stopped seeing myself in it. I saw a version of a girl I used to know, same hair, same nose, but her eyes no longer met mine. She looked down. She stayed quiet. Just like me, I stopped humming. Mama once said I hummed more than I spoke little tunes in the kitchen while brushing my hair, even during spelling tests. She used to laugh and say, "There's always a melody running through you, girl." One day, I caught myself mid-hum and stopped. The house was too quiet for songs, and so I never hummed again. At school, I shrank. My grades didn't slip, but my name disappeared from every corner. No one noticed when I skipped lunch. No one asked why I wore long sleeves in spring. Even Mary Beth, who once plaited my hair during recess, stopped asking to sit beside me. I didn't blame her. I had become a shadow. At home, I did what I was supposed to do. I folded. I cooked. I kept the house clean. I kept the secrets cleaner. Mama drifted through the days like smoke, never landing, never anchoring. She kept herself busy with laundry, prayer, and her knitting. Her eyes rarely met mine. Once she walked past my room and paused. The door was half closed. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in my church dress shoes off, but gloves still on. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but she didn't. She turned, went back down the hallway, and the girl inside me took another step away. Daddy was more careful after that, quieter, more strategic. He didn't come into my room as often, but he didn't need to. All it took was a look, a hand on my back that lingered too long, a whisper in the hallway, "You're mine. You know that, don't you?" I nodded, because that's what ghosts do. They agree to stay unseen. One day, I opened my journal and tore out every page. Every dream I had once written of being a teacher, of visiting the ocean, of wearing blue silk one day, on my wedding gone. I burned the pages in a coffee can behind the barn. The smoke stung my eyes, but I didn't cry. That girl, she had already left. When I was 14, I started walking differently. Not because I wanted to, but because my body hurt too often to move the way I used to. I started wearing my belt tighter, my shoes smaller, any discomfort that reminded me I was still real, still here, still inside this skin. Sometimes I thought of writing a letter to Aunt Lillian, to the school nurse, to the pastor's wife, but the words curled up before they hit the page. What could I say? He does things when the light is off. She looks away when I bleed. Even I wasn't sure what counted as truth anymore. One night during supper, Daddy looked across the table and said, "You're turning into quite a woman, you know." Mama sipped her tea, didn't blink. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, shut the door, and whispered to the girl in the mirror, "Go, just go. Leave me here if you have to." She didn't answer. She never came back. That summer, the peaches ripened too early. The sun scorched the orchard. The chickens laid fewer eggs. Mama said it was a season of thinning. I thought, yes, that's the word, thinning, because I was thinner, not in body, but in spirit, like someone had taken scissors to the edges of my soul. By the time I turned 15, I no longer recognized my handwriting. It had become small, angular, afraid, just like me. I wrote fewer sentences, then none at all, then silence. Once, when Mama was gone at church, I found one of her old lipsticks, deep red, almost plum. I sat in front of the mirror and put it on. My hands shook. My lips looked too old, too loud. I wiped it off before she came home. That night, Daddy touched my cheek and said, "You'd be beautiful if you smiled more." I stopped smiling. One morning, I stood on the porch, wrapped in Mama's old quilt, and watched the sunrise. The light touched the trees, then the roof, then the porch railing. The world was gold, but I felt nothing. I whispered into the breeze, "If you're still in there, come back, please." But all I heard was the soft hum of the porch light, buzzing, flickering, unmoved. And so the girl vanished, not all at once, but slowly, a habit at a time, a word unsaid, a song unsung, a letter unwritten, until one day all that remained was the shape of her, sitting in church, washing dishes, answering to a name she no longer felt. Margaret. Not Pumpkin, not Darlin, not even daughter, just someone who survived. You don't have to bury a girl in the ground to kill her. You just have to stop seeing her. I didn't pack much, just the silence I'd been taught to carry. The day I turned 18, Mama made a lemon cake. It was too sweet, too soft, like she had forgotten how to measure things. She lit 3 candles instead of one big one and said, "They didn't have the number 8 at the store." I nodded, told her it was fine, told her I liked it that way. Daddy gave me a wrapped box, a silver necklace, Small oval locket, empty inside. He fastened it around my neck himself, fingers brushing skin that flinched without showing. "You'll always have a piece of us with you," he said. I swallowed hard, tasted lemon, tasted steel. There was no party, no guests, no photographs. Just the three of us, as always. A quiet table, an empty locket, and the porch light flickering as dusk came on. I'd already packed 2 weeks earlier, a small suitcase hidden beneath loose floorboards in my closet, just clothes $10, and a map with one route marked in red north to a cousin's farm. I barely remembered 5 towns away. I didn't plan a goodbye, didn't write a note, didn't look back. I'd learned long ago that goodbyes require a shared truth. We had none. I left on a Wednesday. The same day Mama always did laundry. The same day I'd first shown her the bruise. There was something fitting about that. I waited until after dinner, washed the dishes, folded the napkins, listened to Daddy's chair creak as he leaned back in contentment, watched Mama wipe the table 3 times more than needed. Then I excused myself. "Going to bed early," I said. Mama looked up. "You feel all right?" I nodded. "Just tired." She smiled. "That's all right. You've had a long week." She didn't ask for a hug, didn't follow me upstairs. And so I walked away the first time while still in plain sight. At midnight, I moved. The house was quiet, save the hum of the fridge and the steady tick of the clock on the wall. I opened the floorboard, took the case, changed into jeans and a sweater, braided my hair, buttoned the coat I'd bought from a church thrift box. Then I stepped down the stairs like a whisper. Each creak rehearsed in my head. Each step a tiny scream in my chest. At the front door, I paused. The porch light was on. Of course it was. I stepped outside, suitcase in one hand, free hand, brushing the wooden post as I passed. The light buzzed above me, same bulb Daddy replaced year after year like a ritual. I reached up, flicked the switch. Off. Then I walked. The road was gravel, cold, the moon high but hazy. I didn't run. I walked with the steadiness of someone who had practiced leaving 1,000 times in her mind. I reached the edge of town before the birds woke. Bought a bus ticket with shaking hands. Destination anywhere he couldn't follow. On the bus, I sat by the window. Watched fences blur into trees. Watched the fields open like lungs. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat, breathing. Still breathing. For the first time on my own breath. It took 2 days to get to the farm. Cousin Ruth was older than I remembered, softer around the eyes, firmer around the mouth. She didn't ask questions when I knocked on her door with tired eyes and a small suitcase. She just said, "Come in. You can stay in the back room." And that was that. No ceremony, no inspection. Just a door that opened, and a room with clean sheets. The first night there, I didn't sleep. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, waiting for footsteps that never came. I think that's when I knew I'd really gone. Not just from the house, but from that version of me who waited, the one who flinched, the one who smiled through blood, the one who looked for love in the wrong direction. I worked on the farm, fed chickens, collected eggs, folded linens, read books I'd never dared check out before. My body healed slowly, my voice slower. But I did speak, eventually. Softly, to the animals first, then to Ruth, then to myself. She never pried, not once. But one night, as we shelled peas by the window, she said, "You don't have to tell me what happened." I nodded. "But if you ever want to," she added, "I'll believe every word." I looked at her hands, strong, veined, steady. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe in safety. One morning, she handed me a letter. No return address, just my name in Daddy's handwriting. I didn't open it. I burned it in the wood stove. Some truths don't belong on paper. Some lies don't deserve the ink. I stayed with Ruth for 2 years, saved money, took evening classes, got a job at the library shelving books, quiet work, clean work, and slowly, gently, I stitched myself back together. I was never normal, never whole, never untouched. But I was free. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. When I walked away, the world didn't change. But I did. And maybe that was the point. The letter wasn't long, just 3 pages, ink blue on yellowed paper, the kind you buy in a cheap grocery aisle between recipe cards and coupons. I wrote it a month after moving in with Ruth. Late one night when the silence wasn't heavy anymore, just still, the air smelled like wood smoke and lavender. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, soft as breath. Inside, I sat at Ruth's old desk with the lamp pulled close and let my hand move before my mind caught up. "Dear Mama," I wrote, "I'm not writing to hurt you." I paused there, let the ink dry, then continued. "I don't want revenge. I don't want apologies. I just want you to know what happened, what you let happen, so I can stop whispering it only to myself." I didn't use his name, not once. I didn't have to. I described the nights, the slow turning of the doorknob, the breath on my neck, the way the mattress dipped beside me. I described the mornings, the quiet eggs, the bruises, the porch light still buzzing like a lie. I described her silence, the kind that wrapped tighter than any hands ever did. I ended it simply. "I still love you, but I had to leave so I could live." I signed it Margaret. Then I folded it, pressed it flat, tucked it into an envelope I never sealed. For weeks, I carried it in my coat pocket, fingering the edge whenever doubt crept in, thinking maybe tomorrow, maybe the day I feel braver, maybe when she writes first. But she never did. I imagined what might happen if she received it. Would she cry? Would she deny it? Would she tell me I misunderstood? Or worse, would she say nothing at all? One afternoon, Ruth found me sitting under the apple tree with the envelope in my lap. She didn't ask. Just sat beside me, pulled her knees up to her chest, and said, "Some words are meant for the page, not the post." I nodded, because by then I already knew. So I kept the letter, moved it from pocket to drawer to box as the years passed. I took it with me when I left Ruth's, carried it into every small apartment, every borrowed couch, every life I tried to build after the first one shattered. It became less a confession and more a relic proof that once I dared to speak, sometimes I'd take it out just to touch it, just to remember the girl who wrote it, not the girl who was hurt, the one who chose to name it, the one who picked up a pen instead of a blade, the one who still wanted to believe in healing. Years later, I found it again while packing. I was 42, divorced, living alone, no children, just a quiet apartment, a job at the library, and too many tea mugs. I opened the envelope. The paper had yellowed more. The ink faded slightly, but the weight of it remained. I didn't cry. I read it out loud softly just to the air. "Dear Mama," my voice trembled only once, on the line. "You let it happen. I didn't send it, still didn't, but I burned it this time." Watched the flames curl around every word. Watched the smoke rise like breath finally released. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I didn't need it anymore. I had already lived the truth. I had survived it. I visited her grave a few years later. Ruth had passed by then. I went alone. It was a modest stone, just her name. No quote, no dates beyond the basics. I sat beside it, knees in the grass, and whispered, "I wrote you once. I needed you to read it. But now, I don't." Then I placed a folded piece of paper on the grave. Blank. because sometimes silence becomes yours again. I never told anyone what I wrote, but I remember every word, not because it saved me, but because writing it was the first thing I ever did purely for myself. No audience, no permission, just a girl alone in the dark, finally speaking her own name. The letter never left my hands, but the truth did. And once it did, I was no longer the same. I didn't mean to stay. I just needed a place to rest. But sometimes healing begins where you least expect it. I came to Willow Creek by accident, not because I had plans, not because I was chasing a fresh start. I was just tired. Tired enough to follow a road I hadn't driven before. Tired enough to stop when the engine coughed outside a house with a crooked fence and a for rent sign in the window. That was 12 years ago, and I never left. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, soft floorboards, and a porch that sagged in the middle like it had secrets of its own. But the windows faced east, and in the mornings the light poured in like warm milk. I could live with that. The neighbors didn't knock at first. They waved, left bags of lemons or tomatoes on the steps, sometimes a pie wrapped in foil with no name. I didn't ask questions, didn't send notes, just returned the pie plate washed and quiet. That was enough. On Sundays, I sat on the porch with tea, sometimes chamomile, sometimes peppermint, always quiet. I watched the children ride their bikes down the gravel road. Watch the old men at the gas station swap stories they'd told 100 times before. Watched life pass, not fast, not loud, just gently. I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. Not quite human yet, but no longer fading. Her name was Lucy. She was 8 when she first appeared at the edge of my yard, barefoot freckled wild curls tied back with a shoelace. "You live here now?" she asked. I nodded. "Are you a grandma?" I blinked, then said, "Not officially." She seemed to think about that, then shrugged. "You can be mine if you want." And just like that, I had a granddaughter. Lucy came every Saturday, sometimes with a book, sometimes with a question, sometimes with nothing but silence and a grin full of missing teeth. We planted basil in coffee cans, made jam from roadside berries, watched clouds like they were stories unfolding. She didn't ask about my past, didn't wonder why my hands shook sometimes, didn't flinch when I paused mid-sentence. She just sat beside me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. One day her mother came. I expected suspicion, maybe a warning, but she only said, "She talks about you all the time?" Then handed me a container of soup. "Chicken and rice," she said. "My grandmother's recipe." I held the warm plastic, nodded, and something in my chest, something sealed tight for decades, shifted. By autumn, I was part of the neighborhood without trying. People waved longer, asked how my garden was doing, dropped off blankets during storms. No one asked about where I came from. No one demanded a history. They just made room. Lucy's school held a community reading night in November. She asked me to come. "I want you to hear my story," she said. I hadn't set foot in a school since I left mine at 18, but I went. The gym smelled like crayons and old wood. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She read a story about a brave girl who planted flowers in a burnt field, who watered them every day even when no one believed they'd grow. When she finished, she looked at me, just a flick of her eyes. But I saw it, and I clapped first. After her teacher said, "You must be so proud," I opened my mouth to say I'm not really her grandmother, but the words never came. Because I was proud of her, of myself for being there. That night, I sat on my porch long after the town went quiet. The tea had gone cold. The stars were bold and wide. And for the first time, I let the porch light stay off. I didn't need it anymore. Not to protect, not to warn, not to tell the world I was still here. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. Lucy came by the next day with a tiny envelope. Inside was a drawing, 2 stick figures sitting under a tree, one with gray hair, the other with messy curls. At the top it said, "Me and my forever grandma." I held it in my lap for hours, then taped it to the fridge. I still flinch sometimes, still wake up sweating, still catch myself staring too long at closed doors. But now I also laugh. I also garden. I also hum again. Not loud, not every day, but enough. The porch still creaks. The floorboards still sigh. The sky still opens wide every morning. And so do I, bit by bit. I came here to be alone. But life had other plans. It gathered me quietly piece by piece until I remembered how to belong. I saw her sitting there, knees together, hands in her lap, and I knew. I knew before she ever opened her mouth. She wasn't supposed to be there. I'd gone to the community center to drop off blankets, just something for the winter drive. I didn't plan to stay, but the room was warm. The chairs were in a circle, and Lucy tugged my sleeve and said, "Stay, Grandma, just for a little." So I did. It was a support group, officially for women in transition. Unofficially, a gathering of those who had endured things no one ever spoke of over coffee or church pews. There were 9 of us that night, some old, some young, some loud, some silent. I sat near the window, close to the exit. Her name was Elsie. 17, maybe 18. She wore a denim jacket too big for her, and her left shoelace was untied. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the floor, eyes flicking every time someone coughed or shifted. I knew that look, knew that quiet, knew those hands clenched in her lap, like if she let go the world might split. The others shared first. Stories of partners, fathers, mothers who looked away. I listened. I nodded, but I said nothing. Even now, even after all these years, I still measured every word before I spoke it aloud. Then Elsie cleared her throat. Barely a sound. A flicker in a forest of voices. She didn't raise her head when she spoke. He used to come in when my mom was asleep. 1 sentence, 7 words. And every part of me stopped breathing. The room went still. No one rushed her. No one asked for more. She didn't cry, didn't shake, but her voice cracked on the last word, "asleep," and that's when she looked up, right at me, and I saw them. Those eyes. My eyes. From 40 years ago. Big. Dark. Stretched thin from too much watching, too much knowing. And I wanted to run, not away from her, but to her, to hold her hand, to say the thing no one ever said to me. I believe you, but I didn't speak. Not then. I waited through 2 more women and 1 story about healing that felt too shiny. Then I opened my mouth and said, "My name is Margaret." A few turned, some nodded. But Elsie, she didn't blink. Like she'd known I would speak. "I left home at 18, I said. My mother was alive. My father was too." The air in the room shifted. I didn't give details, didn't offer names, but I gave enough. Enough for Elsie to know she wasn't the only one. Enough for the others to realize silence doesn't mean absence. I talked for 6 minutes. That's what Lucy told me after. 6 minutes, Grandma. You finally used your voice. I wanted to tell her I'd been using my voice all along, just not out loud. After the meeting, Elsie hovered by the door. I stepped toward her, slowly, carefully. "I see you," I said. She looked up, met my eyes again, didn't look away. "You believe me?" she asked. I didn't answer. I placed both hands on her shoulders, and I nodded. She came by the next week, not to my house, but to the garden behind the center. She sat in the dirt picking at weeds, silent as wind. I handed her gloves. She didn't take them, so we worked in silence, together. The following week, she brought me tea. By spring, we had a row of sunflowers. She didn't move back in with her mom. She didn't forgive the man. But she started laughing, small at first, like raindrops on tin, then louder, like hope. Sometimes I still see her walking past my house. She waves. Sometimes she stops. One time she asked, "Do you ever stop remembering?" I shook my head. No, but the remembering softens. She nodded. Good. That's what I'm waiting for. I don't think she knows how much she gave me. How much her face reminded me of a girl I'd buried under years of quiet. Not in fear, but in survival. I never had a daughter, but if I had, I think she might have looked like Elsie. Same stubborn jaw. Same way of sitting too still. Same voice just waiting for the world to hush so it can be heard. She reminded me of the girl I once was, but more than that, she reminded me of the woman I'd become. I've always been good at carrying things. Groceries, laundry baskets, small children fallen asleep on the couch. But the things I carry inside, those have never had handles. Just wait. When I left home at 18, I didn't pack much. A dress, $2, and the quiet. It sat with me on the bus, slept beside me on borrowed beds, held my hand in job interviews, tugged my sleeve when the world looked too wide. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of names. I never said questions. I never asked answers I never got. People talk about healing like it's a finish line. Like one day you wake up with the sun on your face and your lungs full and say, "I made it. I'm done." But it's not like that. It's more like this. You stand in the grocery store and see a man with hands like your father's, and you flinch. You hear a girl laugh like your old self once did, and you ache. You open a box, you forgot you packed, and there it is. The letter, the photo, the thing you thought you buried, and all at once you're carrying again. I've carried shame, even though I had no reason to, even though I was the one who stayed silent so others could keep pretending. Shame has sharp edges. It doesn't weigh the most, but it cuts the deepest. I've carried blame, the kind you swallow every time someone says, "Why didn't you tell someone?" As if I didn't try. As if a child can explain what even grown women struggle to name. I've carried longing, not for what I had, but for what I should have had. A mother who asked, a father who didn't touch, a girlhood with songs instead of secrets. Longing is the heaviest, because it grows with you. It learns your name. But I've also carried strength, not the loud kind, not fists on the table kind. Mine was quieter. It made the bed every morning, showed up to work, let go of the doorknob when I wanted to turn back. It learned to plant flowers in broken soil, to braid a child's hair with steady hands, to say I'm here without needing to explain why. I've carried names, Elsie, Ruth, Lucy, women who saw me before I knew how to be seen. Women who didn't ask for the whole story, just offered space for it to unfold. And I've carried the girl I used to be, not always kindly, but faithfully. She walks with me still barefoot bruised, humming just under her breath. She is the part of me that never gave up, even when I wanted her to. One day I cleaned out my closet, found a box I hadn't opened in decades. Inside a ribbon, a dried sunflower, a single earring, and a photo. I'd forgotten it existed. Me at 15, standing stiff in a church dress, eyes too old for the frame. I stared at her, at myself, and I whispered, "You made it." She didn't smile, but I did. What we carry doesn't disappear. It settles. It shifts. It shapes the way we walk, the way we reach, the way we pause before entering a room. But it doesn't own us. Not forever. Lucy once asked me why I always tie my scarf the same way. I told her it keeps me steady. What I didn't say was, it's how I carry her. Mama, even now, even after the silence, even after the leaving. I don't hate her. I don't need her to come back. But I carry her. Not in blame, just in understanding. She was broken too, just differently. Some burdens aren't ours to hold, but we carry them anyway until we learn how to lay them down without shame. And some weights we choose to keep. Not because we can't let go, but because they remind us how far we've come. I don't carry the pain like I used to. Now it walks beside me, and sometimes it even steps aside. That porch light. It's not just habit. It's defiance. It was the last week of February, the kind of night where snow didn't fall, but hovered a cold breath in the dark. My house, like most on the street, had its windows shut tight, but my porch light was on, just like always. Inside, the living room was quiet. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. Lucy sat on the floor, back against the couch legs, stretched toward the old heater. Beside her, Ruthie from the church poured cider into ceramic mugs. Pastor Al leaned against the bookshelf, nodding gently as if in silent prayer. Two of the Miller boys stood in the hallway, awkward in their coats, not sure if they should stay or go. And there was Marlene, 62 heavy coat still on snow melting into her sleeves, seated at the far end of the sofa. She didn't say a word, but she stayed. I'd started the weekly prayer circle months ago. Not as a mission, not even as a plan, just a place to sit, a place to exhale. It began with Lucy bringing over her study group, then one of the church ladies asking if we could light a candle for someone's daughter. Now every Thursday people showed up. Sometimes 2, sometimes 10. Always quietly, always just needing a room with warm light. Lucy spoke first that night. I got in, she said, smiling into her mug. In where I asked. University of Illinois. Sociology. Full scholarship. I leave in August. A small gasp rose from Ruthie. The others murmured their congratulations. Lucy looked at me, eyes shining. You wrote me that letter of recommendation, remember? I nodded. Of course I do. You didn't just write it, she said. You made them believe in me. I smiled, didn't say a word. Some moments don't need words, just warmth. I stood, then walked to the kitchen, refilled the kettle. As I passed the window, I glanced out. The porch light glowed amber. Snow gathered in soft piles along the railing. From inside, the world looked gentle. I thought of Mama. Always leave a light on, she used to say, even if no one's coming home. Back then, it felt like a prayer whispered into an empty room. Now, it felt like a door left ajar. I returned with the kettle, began to pour, and that's when Marlene spoke. Her voice was low, almost uncertain. Your porch, she said without looking up, was the only light I saw that night I almost left. Silence fell. No one moved. Even Lucy went still. Marlene didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Those words held everything. The weight, the darkness, the decision not to keep driving, not to disappear. Because something, just one thing had said, you're not alone. I didn't speak, didn't offer sympathy, didn't wrap her in pity. Instead, I walked over, refilled her cup, held her gaze for just a breath longer than usual. That was enough. She nodded, once eyes shimmering. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow blew across the porch in diagonal ribbons, but the light stayed steady, warm, defiant. I once thought leaving the light on was for someone else, for Mama, for Daddy, for a version of me that might come back someday. But now, I see it differently. It's not about waiting. It's about saying, here, this place, this door, this heart, it's open. For the broken, for the tired, for the ones driving with nowhere to go. Later that evening, Lucy handed me a folded napkin. Inside a drawing of my porch, the yellow light spilled onto snow. 3 figures sat on the steps. One had gray hair. Beneath it, she'd written, "Hope doesn't knock. It looks for light." When everyone left, I stood at the door a while, watched their silhouettes disappear down the street. Marlene walked slower. But she walked. I didn't turn the porch light off. Not that night. Not anymore. Somewhere someone is driving, or walking, or standing on the edge of something they can't name. And they'll see it, this house, this light. And they'll know someone left it on. Not because she's waiting, but because she remembers, because she believes, because she knows what it means to be swallowed by the dark and saved by a flicker. The light stays on. Not because I'm waiting, because someone else might be. I am not the girl who left, and I am not the girl they hurt. I am the woman who stayed, who healed, who lit the way back. There are things I will never forget. The porch step that creaked every night at 2:14 a.m. The shape of his shadow in the doorway. The sound of Mama stirring tea she never drank. I used to think forgetting would be freedom, that if I could just erase the memories, I'd be clean again. New, untouched. But that's not how it works. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering and surviving it anyway. Some mornings I wake before the sun. The light hasn't risen. The birds are still sleeping. The house breathes slow. And I just sit. I wrap my fingers around a warm mug. I listen to the hush. And I think about the girl I used to be. Not in shame, not in pity, but in awe. Because she endured. Because she chose to keep going. Because she gave me this life. I look in the mirror now and I see her. Not the bruises, not the silence, but the strength, the stubbornness, the knowing. The woman I became was built by every version of me that kept breathing. Even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, I still keep the porch light on. Even now, even tonight. It's not about fear anymore. It's not about memory either. It's about declaration. This house is not afraid of shadows. This life is not built on silence. That light says I'm here. I made it. You can too. Sometimes Lucy visits with friends. They laugh loud, spill lemonade on the porch, tell stories that stretch the truth for fun. I love that sound. It's the opposite of what I grew up with. And yet, it feels like home. Elsie writes now, essays, poems. One of them was published in a campus journal. She sent it to me. It was called The House with the Light. The last line read, "She never asked for my story. She just made room for it." I cried when I read it, not out of sadness, but because I realized I had become the woman I needed. And maybe that was the whole point. I never went back to that old house, never stood in front of that faded door, never looked into Mama's empty windows. But I've built something here, something better, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest, because it holds. Some people measure a life by what was lost. I don't. I measure it by what I gave away and what I kept. I gave away fear. I gave away shame. I gave away the lie that no one would believe me. But I kept the light. I kept the truth. And I kept my name. Yes, my name. I say it now without flinching. Margaret Ann Holloway, not his daughter. Not just a girl from a small town with a sad story. Not a secret. A woman, a keeper of stories, a listener, a witness, a grandmother in every way that matters. There are nights when the wind howls, when the trees bend and the sky forgets how to hold still. On those nights I stand by the window, I look at the porch, at the light, at the space I've made, and I think maybe someone somewhere is walking down a dark road. Maybe they need what I once needed. Not a rescue, not a sermon, just a sign. Just a flicker. Just the knowledge that somewhere someone kept a light on. And if they find me, if they knock, I'll open the door. Not as the girl I once was. Not even as the woman I dreamed of becoming, but as who I am now. Whole, worn, and radiant with all I've lived through. They tried to define me by what they did to me, but I am not what they did. I am what I chose to build from it. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones we carry in silence. Not because we're weak, but because we were never given the language to name them. Because the world was too loud with denial and too quiet with compassion. But silence is not the end of the story. It never was. Margaret's life was not defined by what was taken from her, but by what she chose to build in its place. She didn't just survive, she transformed. From the girl with no voice to the woman who left a light on not for herself, but for everyone walking through the dark. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not forgetting, not pretending, but remembering, choosing to live anyway, and gently, defiantly making room for someone else to do the same. So if you're listening to this and you're carrying something heavy, a memory, a silence, a name you haven't said out loud in years, know this: you are not alone. You are not invisible, and the light is still on.